Great song, and what a prophetic vision that gives us as we rejoice before our God this evening. Brother Darren has kindly agreed to exhort us, and he has asked that we 1 Corinthians chapter 13, 1 Corinthians chapter 1. So I invite Brother Lindsay to come forward and read that for us. Thanks, Brother Lindsay. Before we partake of the emblem, brothers and sisters, it is fitting that we are exhorted, and I would like to invite Brother Darren to come forward and exhort us.
Well, good evening. I've got to get used to saying that tonight. Good evening, my dear brothers and sisters in the Lord Jesus Christ, dear young people, and all the Darrens out there. It's nice to be with you all today. It's nice to, in a small way, contribute to your open day tomorrow. Remember the last one? Have you had before? Is this the second one? The last one was wonderful, and free coffee. It's hard to beat. So that was a good day. So I hope tomorrow is blessed by God as well and is a success. I normally would bring with love and greetings from Boston, but they're like a whole 15 hours away from us. They're not going to be doing this for a while, so we'll don't worry about that right now. Well, it's lovely to be here, as I said, and I have chosen an exhortation that's got a sort of a bit of a preaching edge to it because it's a special weekend for Hunter Valley, so hopefully that will resonate. I'm going to talk about and take a theme from 1 Corinthians 1, the preaching of the cross, and the words that Paul says there that we've got on the screen. We preach Christ crucified, and we're going to make a few comments about that this morning. I want to start off with a few interesting observations. This is not the main thrust of our exhort. I just want to make a few things evident that might be helpful. We raise the question, and someone tomorrow may even talk to you about this. Did Jesus even exist? Is he a real figure of history, or is he a figure of mythology? And so there's a really lot of very incredible evidence about this subject. And I don't want to, as I said, dwell on that this morning. That's not the point this morning, but I just want to make a few comments about it. There is for those who may want to follow up on this in more detail, there's a really good writer who has spent a lot of time looking at this subject. He's a professor, a research professor at a university in the States. His name's Dr. Gary Habermas, and he's written a number of books. He's like one of the recognised authorities on the subject of the resurrection. An interesting way of approaching the subject, so you don't have to necessarily get bogged down on all the issues that surround it. And what he does, he has a 600-page dynamic Word document on his computer, and he constantly follows research from relevant fields, research from archaeology, from New Testament studies, from history, relating to the existence of Jesus and the evidence for his existence and for verification of events that the Bible records. Now, he constantly monitors research from different publications, different research journals. It's peer-reviewed and has gone through the processes and has reached publications status. And it's quite amazing to see the way that this research pans out. He keeps two lists on his document. One list is facts about Jesus that virtually, and it's universal in one sense, all scholars accept. So you don't need to go out and buy yourself any archaeological equipment and go dig things up and look at it. You have read from people in these fields all across the spectrum, and he looks at research from scholars that might be atheists, scholars that might be Jewish, scholars that might be Muslim scholars. They might be writing in French or in Italian or German or in English or from the States. They might be atheists, might be agnostic, might be evangelical Christians, might be Catholic. So he looks at all the research right across the entire spectrum, and he maintains two lists. Now, the first list is, as I said, events about Jesus that basically all scholars across the spectrum agree on. Currently there's five facts in that list. We'll talk about that in a minute. And he has a second list, which is what the majority of scholars believe and have published in reference to Jesus, and that has 12 items in it. So really quickly, the 5 items that you can consider bedrock. I mean, this is, as I said, research scholars who have done the analysis, done the work, and these are the 5 facts that we know about Jesus, that he existed. Absolutely know that bedrock fact about Jesus, that he was executed by the Romans. His immediate followers believe that he rose from the dead, and that the idea of Jesus rising from the dead is very early and follows very close to the actual death of Jesus. That there was a person by the name of Saul who was once a persecutor of Jesus who becomes a follower and a significant follower. James was changed from being a skeptic, if you like, and converted to become a follower of Jesus, and that Jesus' tomb was found empty after he was initially placed in it. So those are 5 absolute bedrock facts that we know about Jesus, which is quite interesting, isn't it? So we don't need to argue about these. It's like arguing with someone that the Holocaust didn't exist or something like that. Whether Elvis is still alive, I don't know. This is public research that is absolutely accepted right across. There's another list. As I said, there's 12 items on the list. I'm not going to go through it in any detail. It's got the 5 on it. But a few other interesting things, and that relates to the early believers and the way they were motivated by this belief that Jesus rose from the dead, so much so they gave their life for it. So if they made it up, they sort of died still proclaiming that. And there's a few other interesting ones in there. But we've got these facts about Jesus that correlate with what scriptures actually say. Just, as I said, I don't want to get bogged. Just one example, just to give you a very interesting example here of how the existence of Jesus is verified and the significance of it and some context about it as well. We can ask the question, how many non-biblical sources do we have for the existence of Jesus from antiquity, from the ancient world? And of course they didn't have newspapers and videos and recording devices and things that we take for granted today, of course. So what are the actual references, the unfriendly references, if you like, ones that aren't written by Christians or written by the Bible authors? How many of those sources do we have? Well, there are 10. 10 ancient writers mention Jesus within 150 years of his life. They might be saying, well, is that good or bad, or what's the relevance of that? You can compare that to the number of references made to Caesar, who ruled the world at the time of Jesus' birth, Tiberius Caesar. And looking at that same period of time, that same 150-year period of time, we have 9 references to Tiberius Caesar. So we've got 10 to Jesus, a peasant carpenter or craftsman from a backwater village, and only 9 references to the Caesar who ruled the entire world. So Jesus is mentioned in more sources than Caesar himself. And when we add the biblical references and the Christian references, well, references to Jesus totally overwhelm those of Caesar. So let's just think about the reality of what this means. There's this person called Jesus Christ, or Jesus of Nazareth. Let's stick with that for a moment. He doesn't come from a rich or a famous family. Born in a stable, as the story has it. He grew up in poverty, and there's evidence from the scriptures about that as well. In a despised backwater village that no one cared much about or respected, called Nazareth, up north in Galilee, not even part of Judea, way up north, not even contiguous with the main areas that Jews inhabited down south. I've equated it to Woy Woy, if you want to get it. So I'm trying to find a similar place. Yeah, that's where I grew up. So, he's a simple carpenter or a craftsman of some sort, work with his hands, same trade that his father had. It appears from the story, the narrative, that his father believes the son must have died while Jesus was. And so he works with his hands in a little village in the back of nowhere, a despised little village, or even a hamlet. Some historians say it probably doesn't even rate as a village. Might have been a hamlet up there in Galilee. He has no armies at his disposal. He has no money or resources. He has no fortification. There's no evidence that he travelled extensively. He crossed the border a couple of times in his entire lifetime. In Egypt as a baby, and Syro-Phoenician woman that he talks to, and that's all I can think of off the top of my head. But he rarely goes to Samaria, I suppose. But he never travelled to those centres of education and culture like Athens and Alexandria and places like that. And when he does begin his public ministry, he's followed by 12, would say, working class, very ordinary, uneducated followers, fishermen, and most of them from Galilee, like himself. So I just want us to think about that. You can put those into your shelf of your brain for a moment as we just try and work out what's happening here. I took this from a book where the writer says it's really inconceivable that a peasant class farmer with no money, no army, no special social position, no connections, no contacts, could generate a world-shaking force like Christianity. There's no logical human way to explain that. His teachings grew so rapidly and went on to revolutionise human civilization and talk about our exhortation. His early followers, uneducated, lower class, largely illiterate, existing in isolated groups of believers, bonded together for mutual support in a hostile environment. And he observes there that groups like that rarely are even noticed in history, let alone change history. So this morning I knew I'd do that. I knew I'd do it at least once. I should have a little jar I put money in every time I say this morning. This evening, we're going to apply some logic to Jesus, to the whole story of Jesus. The logic comes from a Jewish Sanhedrin member, very respected Jewish rabbi, by the name of Gamaliel. So you remember in the narrative, the apostles after Jesus ascended, they go in the city, seeking people to attract a lot of attention. The Sanhedrin is sort of perplexed as to what to do with them, and so they're arrested. Two of them are arrested and taken to the Sanhedrin. Now, Gamaliel makes this call. Now, he's extremely respected. He's able to sort of give this advice and accepted by everyone. He asks that they be taken from the immediate room, and he addresses the rest of the Sanhedrin, and he says to them, he says, "Men of Israel," he says, "take care what we do today, these men." And then he goes through a catalogue of other pretenders, messianic, come and gone in the recent history. And there's a lot more than he references here. Some writers have gone through and detailed lots and lots of these pretenders or messiahs, if you like, claiming to be the Messiah. He lists a couple. He says, "Remember a guy called this who rose up, took about 400 men with him. Look how he finished up. He was killed, and all his followers were dispersed." That would be the normal trajectory. He gets killed, those people are disillusioned, and they head off, and it all comes to nothing. And then he mentions another man by the name of Judas up in Galilee, and around the time of the census, he also drew people around him and had a following. He too perished. And we're not told how they perished, but they would have come to very painful, excruciatingly painful ends as they were down, as their witness looked down. And everyone who followed him scattered. That's the normal way it happens. So he says, if this is just man-made, it'll end up exactly like those other pretenders. It'll come to nothing. Be all over. So he says, look, let's ignore these people if it's man-made, it's some craziness and disappear. If it is from God, however, and it's true, well, we've got to be careful not to go against God. So his advice is taken up at that particular time. So we want to think about that logic in our thoughts this evening. Is this a man-made theory, a man-made conspiracy, a man-made idea? And if it was it should really have finished, shouldn't it have disappeared into the dust of history, or is it from God? Well, firstly, I want to just talk about how Jesus died. This is the very centre of what we're thinking about today. Jesus was crucified. We've had, over my lifetime, and I'm sure you've heard people exhort about pain involved in crucifixion, and even that word excruciating is a Latin word means from the cross. Being crucified and excruciating pain are sort of related. Today, this morning, I almost said it again, John, I'm so sorry. Tonight, this evening, what's the official to this evening? This evening. We're going to not focus on pain so much, but the shame of being crucified. Crucifixion, you've probably heard people say this before, but it was the punishment meted out to slaves. And you probably read over that like I've done. What's the big deal about that? Slaves, whatever. But you think about the Roman Empire at the time of Jesus, we're told at least 25%, sometimes higher, that percentage is higher, of Rome itself, of the main capital city of the Empire, Rome, were slaves. So there's a lot of slaves. Think about how those slaves got there. Those slaves been literally dragged or kidnapped from places all over the Roman Empire. Many of them have probably seen their family brutally killed, seen their sisters, their mothers raped, they've seen their fathers hacked to pieces, been treated with absolute terrible ways, dragged from their homes, dragged to Rome, and now they're looking after people's kids, putting them in bed at night and tucking them in. So you can imagine the danger involved in that, can't you? These people that are being treated so brutally are now involved in the domestic life of Rome. So crucifixion was, if you like, a terror, a way of instilling terror into these slaves, that if they ever stepped out of line or ever did anything against the family that they were working, against the interests of that family in any way, they would suffer this unspeakable death. And that's what it was, unspeakable, disgraceful, and a shameful death. Nailed to cross, withering in agony for sometimes days, in absolute agony. So that concept and that methodology was very effective. And then the idea extends out of Rome itself to the rest of the empire, and it becomes something that is used to distill fear into the enemies of Rome, particularly rebels and revolutionaries. And it was done then when a revolutionary was captured. They crucified in a public place, somewhere on a main road, on the Appian Way, or on a crossroad in the Roman Empire, or outside near a busy place in the empire. Think of Jesus' own crucifixion. Those who have been to Israel, been to Jerusalem, know it's only a few hundred metres from where we think Golgotha is, to Temple Mount, which is the centre of Jewish life. So it was done in a very public place. And this writer, a well-known historian, also another authority on the resurrection, says crucifying people beside busy roads or by the entrance of the city was, of course, designed to make a statement, issue a warning. People with business on those highways would walk past those terrible spectacles every day, and we may presume that many slaves would look and shudder and say that even their present miserable life was better than that. So it would instill absolute terror and fear into people. And it was really the crux of what crucifixion was designed to do. But it wasn't an oath. It wasn't like a hitting maybe a great person with everyone looking on and seeing them step up to platform beheaded or hung in a sort of a noble way with some dignity. This was no dignity, it was absolutely shameful, and you would be so embarrassed to be connected to anyone who would suffer like that and be put through that whole process. And that's really the miracle that's happening here. You think of that. So the cross is a torture device. You know, people wear them on their earrings and place them tattooed on them and everything. Imagine if you had a little guillotine or electric chair as a necklace or on your earring or something. It's sort of incongruous. At one level, it seems incongruous, doesn't it? So think you've got a torture device sort of hung around your neck or something. But this is the transformation of the symbol that we're going to talk about in a moment. Something incredible has happened. Now, Lindsay read for us 1 Corinthians 1. I'd love to spend a bit more time in that, but we're not going to have a lot of time this evening to do that. An observation here in Corinthians 1. He says, the message of the cross. Now, think about the reality of this. If you're like me, I've read over this all my life, and it's, of course, the preaching of the cross is foolishness. But you try and imagine what it would be like to say, my hero, the person I follow, the person I've committed my life to, and the movement I'm part of, he was crucified. I mean, you know, we've had 2,000 years of conditioning and to see that crucifixion in a particular way, but you put yourself back in ancient Rome, that would have been super embarrassing and just so counterintuitive that you would nuts. But he says, to those who are perishing, it's crazy, but to those who have been saved, it's the power of God. That's, you know, there's a lot of daylight between those two concepts, isn't there? There's like huge gulf there. To some people it's nuts. It's like foolishness. For other people it's the power of God. Well, this is true. He says, but we preach Christ crucified. To the Jews it's a stumbling block. They couldn't get past the fact that God anointed would suffer like that. And the Greek is just nuts, it's just crazy. But those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, it's the power of God. You can see the dichotomy here. It's quite profound, isn't it? So the believer like us, we look at that crucifixion and see the power of God, the wisdom of God. The majority of people in Rome, they saw foolishness. Foolishness or the power of God? The power of God or foolishness? Foolishness or the power of God? The power of God or buckets all day. But we better keep moving. But you can see that it's quite a significant difference in perspectives here. So, power is an interesting word. I just want to think about that. You can see the power of God here or foolishness. I want you to look at this picture and think about power. Where is power exhibited in this question, in this picture? You've got an official officer, Roman officer, with all his paraphernalia and insignia on. He's got his helmet and his weapons and his armour, and he's got his pen with him. He's got his rank and authority, and he's thrusting a piece of military equipment to the side of a naked man that's been crucified, that's hanging on a pole, absolute degradation and shame, and he's poking a pointed weapon into his body. What end of the spear has the power? What do you think? What do you see it as wisdom of God, or do you see it as foolishness? You see how most people who have ever lived see that as foolishness. Where's Roman? And what we're going to see as we think about this subject is something has happened to power. And I didn't make this up, but one writer came up with this phrase. It was the power of love is exhibited, which turned on its head the love of power. Just like that. For us old guys, we're very proud of that. So the young people will even care less about it. But I'm going to do it once more. How's that? Got it. The power of love overturns the love of power. It's, you can say, countercultural, counterintuitive, but it literally goes against everything and every way the world operates, even in nature. It goes against everything. The power of love is greater than power itself. We might say this is like opposite day. You know what opposite day is? When we were kids, just a hint, if you like the girl, you could say, I like you, and if she says, that's disgusting, or I should say, opposite day, I mean, it's a little trick. I've got a lot of advice on that area. So, my book's coming out soon. This is opposite, totally against everything, isn't it? That the whole way that the world works, as I said, in the natural world, but even in our politics, in our society, it's the opposite. And Jesus taught something that was totally counterintuitive. The first shall be last, he said. That's not how the world had ever worked and ever would. First shall be last and the last first. And these are the sayings of Jesus. This is something that will revolutionise the world. And I'm going to talk about the impact Jesus has had on the world and the way we think. The very air we breathe, from a sort of a sociological perspective, if you like, or the things we value, the things we admire, and the things we don't. Where did those intuitions come from? Where did we pick up those moral cues that we sort of have put into our system, if you like? They weren't there in ancient Rome. People were tortured on the side of the road. People went and watched gladiators being killed. And so where did this moral sensitivity come from that has permeated our world, even if people don't acknowledge the source of it? Now, when I was young, we would call it socialism. We had people who cared and defended and protected those who were marginalised or those who were oppressed. We'd say it's a socialistic idea, or in the modern world, we might call it woke, if you like. And there's no doubt very genuine people who are concerned about the marginalised and those who are oppressed in society, and also others who use the politics of that of the marginalised for their own political and power ends as well. But where did these ideas come from? And sadly, even those who have these intuitions and are very much concerned about these things don't realise that Jesus was the one who changed the way we think about human life and we think about others. And this is built into the very DNA of Jesus. This is quite profound when we look at some of the scriptures. Here's a prophecy of Jesus. This is a prophecy of John the Baptist and what he would preach, what he would talk about when he presented Jesus to the world. And it's from Isaiah 40, well-known words, but he says, comfort ye, my people, says and every mountain and hill brought low. It's an interesting concept, a valley being lifted up and the mountain being brought down. It's sort of like an equalising process taking. It's sort of things being equalised in some way. Grandeur and greatness has been reduced and brought be in alignment with the low places. This is, as I said, in the very DNA of Jesus himself. Even Mary, his mother, once she receives the news from the angel that she's going to have this incredible son, the Son of God, she sings this beautiful song. We haven't time to look at it now, but just focus on the bits there that I've highlighted. Her song contains all these ideas, similar ideas. He has put down the mighty on their thrones. He's exalted the lowly. And he's filled the hungry, and he's sent the rich away in. So you can see the topsy-turvy nature of that. And again, when it goes against the social norms, particularly of those days, it seemed crazy. In Jewish culture, the rich were seen as blessed by God, and the poor, they had very screwed up ideas on that. So this was counterintuitive and countercultural and counter-religious to even the way most Jews were brought up. The mighty are being brought down and the lowly are being lifted up. Even Jesus' very first public, if you like, expression that goes back to the synagogue in Nazareth, and he goes up and reads the scroll of Isaiah that he would have done quite regularly on a Saturday like we're doing today. He comes to Nazareth and he reads from that scroll of Isaiah. He reads, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he's anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. See these ethical values, if you like, and these moral cues and these moral intuitions are built into Jesus' very first public expression. He is sent to proclaim liberty to the captives, the recovering of sight to the blind, set at liberty those who are oppressed. This is as I said, his very first public expression. In very early on in Matthew, we've got that very famous Sermon on the Mount, the famous discourse that Jesus makes. Even in that, you can see the similar themes and similar ideas coming through, and he's talking about the poor in spirit. Blessed and happy are the poor in spirit, those that mourn, those who are seeking righteousness, those that are merciful, the peacemakers, the persecuted. And he's called that discourse is structured like a manifesto. It's like, this is my policy speech. This is what I'm all about reaching the poor in spirit, those that have been oppressed. So these ideas permeate everything he says. The rest of the discourse on the Mount, he talks about don't resist evil, don't fight back. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn the left cheek to them. If someone asks for your tunic, give them your coat as well, you don't resist. Someone says go 1 mile, you go 2. Give to anyone who wants to borrow, don't hold back. Love your enemies. I mean, how counterintuitive is that? Love your enemies. And then he goes, bless those that actually do bad things to you. So it's not neutral. It's very powerful in a particular direction. If someone treats you bad, you actually bless them and give something good to them in return. Pray for those who despitefully use you. They're really extreme words, aren't they? Has anyone ever done that to you? I've never been despitefully used that I think of. Despitefully used by somebody. And I should pray for them, if that's the case, if I have. Do good to those who hate. So someone hates you, you actually do good to them. This is like, again, counterintuitive. It goes against every human instinct. It goes against the way, particularly the way the Jewish world thought, and of course the Roman world and the Greek world, but the Jews believed in eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. This was so counterintuitive. So ideas like equality, kindness and compassion, where did they come from? Who infused those into our thinking that we admire these things today? And we look at these things as if, well, many of us just accept them as if they've always existed. But where did these values come from that we think being kind is good and being compassionate is good? I mean, people have always been kind to their own children, of course, and their own kin. To be kind to other people that you don't even know. You hear about an earthquake, a tsunami in Indonesia, and there's a telethon on, and people raise money and donate their pay to a telethon to support people in Indonesia you've never met, you never will meet, and not even part of your society. So where did these instincts, where did these intuitions come from? Well, the idea of equality, that people are equal, that no one's greater than another. Where did that come from? We've got some little examples here. Here's Jesus the night before he's actually going to be crucified. It's a very famous event. We won't go through it in any detail, but Jesus washes the feet of his disciples, and he uses these words. Now, I find these words powerful. I remember when Charles became king and we had the coronation. Did anyone watch Coronation? Susan's into that stuff, so I wouldn't normally watch it because, like, I'm a bloke, but I had to watch it with Suze. So, but as Charles would move around the different places and he'd put things on his head and stuff in all the different rituals, he'd repeat that. Someone would hold up a bit of paper, couldn't learn it off, but they'd hold up bits of paper and he would read, and this phrase kept coming back over and over again. It was quite interesting. It was servant leadership, servant ruling, servant service to his people. And this idea of being a servant, even though a ruler, I'm a servant ruler, kept coming up over and over again. Now, where did that come from? The gods of the kings in Greece and Rome didn't think they were servants of the people. They were gods. They considered themselves above the normal human. They were like gods or children of gods. Here we've got the king of the British Empire who's claiming to be a servant and ruling as a servant. This is where Jesus has infused, in even superficial ways, but in You know, even when you think about the most powerful force in any nation, of course you've got your president or executive, and you've got the ministers or the board, if you like, or the cabinet, those who have the power over all the different parts of running the whole country. The fact they call themselves ministers, that word minister is the word servant. They call themselves servants, and their administration, that those who carry out their will in using all the resources and the power of the country, are called public servants or civil servants. They may not act like that when you interact with them, but even the idea, the lip service they give is that they're servants. Where did that idea come from? Those who rule as servants. Well, here's an example. Jesus says amongst the Gentiles, they believe in power, and they lord it over others. That's how they live their life. And one exercises authority over somebody else. That's not what we're about. That's not, we're doing none of that. Whoever is going to be greater in my service is actually going to be a servant. They're going to serve others. And whoever's going to be first is going to be a slave to others. I think that's an ESV rendering of servant, slave. For the Son of Man cannot be served, but to serve and to give his life, which is the ultimate act of service, isn't it? So Jesus is saying, I'm your Lord and Master, and that's true, but I'm a servant. And if you want to be part of my movement, you serve others. That's where greatness is seen. Interesting as we look at how, again, quickly through some examples here, how Jesus interacts with the marginalised, if you like, or those who are looked down on, those who are despised in his culture. Let's look at an example of ethnic marginalisation, if you like. The Jews at the time of Christ hated the Samaritans. They hated them with absolute passion. You know, a Jew was travelling from Judea in the south up to Galilee. Instead of walking through Samaria, which was in between them, they would walk across the Jordan and go around the long way because they hated Samaritans so much, they despised them. Jesus not only interacts with Samaritans, as we'll see, the woman at the well in John 4 is a classic case, but in one of his most profound interactions, when he's asked, what is the greatest commandment? This is the pinnacle of what it means to serve God, most greatest commandment. He illustrates that interaction with a hero, and the hero of his story is a Samaritan. Now, think about how crazy that is. Think about how countercultural that is. He uses a despised ethnic group and makes him the hero of a story to illustrate the most important concept, how to greatest commandment, if you like. It's incredible. And then, of course, his interaction, as I mentioned, with the Samaritan woman. And when his disciples come back, they've left him, remember, at the well. He interacts with this woman. She's shocked. He goes, talking to me? You're a Jew. What are you talking to me for? They come back and they're shocked. They're shocked for two reasons. He's talking to a Samaritan and a woman. I mean, even Jesus breaks the cultural norms with that as well. In fact, the very first witnesses that the Bible reports to the resurrection. So you think this resurrection's going to be hard to sell. No one's going to really believe it. The first witnesses are women. In that culture, that's very counterintuitive that you would do that. Even today, just when you look at the composition of those who claim to follow Jesus, now I don't believe everyone who follows Jesus has a true gospel, of course, and that goes without saying, so I'm just using these terms generally. But those who follow Jesus, you look at the composition and you see this idea of the resurrection of Jesus and the fact that he's the Son of God is universal. No other philosophy. Of course, there are some people that are Buddhists that are Western, and there's some people that enjoy Islam that are Arabs, etc. But there's nothing like Christianity as far as multi-cultural adherence goes. So, in fact, the growing areas of Christianity today, it's funny, in places like Australia and Canada and UK, Christianity is reducing, and it's going gangbusters in Africa and Asia and other places. Even those that would despise and look down on because of health reasons, because of the lepers, and I don't know if anyone here has watched Chosen, but one of the most moving scenes in the Chosen was where Jesus heals the leper, and leading up to the scene was the way the lepers were treated by the townspeople. So that people would literally throw stones at them to keep them away and scream at them to get away from their house and get away from their village, etc. Prostitutes, Jesus interacts with sinners, to the euphemism for prostitutes, who were despised and often so entrenched in poverty that they had no way out. Tax collectors were like collaborators basically with the Romans. And I won't go through the whole lot, but you know how Jesus interacts with all those different marginalised groups. Even, this is not Jesus, of course, but later on Paul would use these incredibly famous words in Galatians 3. He says, and we read this as if it's just common sense today, don't we? We read that and it's like, of course, there's no. But these words are groundbreaking when Paul, inspired by the teachings of Jesus, said these words. There's neither Jew nor Greek. There's no difference between two different ethnicities to the quality of the person. There's neither slave nor free. One's not better than the other. There's no male or female. We're all one in Christ, and that was quite a unique perspective. Even other little hints that come up in the New Testament. Jesus is inspired, say James, for example. James says, don't show partiality. If someone comes into the Ecclesia, they're wearing really expensive clothes. Don't show them more respect than someone who's poor. And just changing the way that, in those days, society treated people. And even though we pretend in our more sophisticated world not to do that, we of course do it as well. So when this information is, people are confronted with this information, people respond and say, well, the real change that made the world a much more humane place where, we don't torture people in public anymore and we don't treat orphans bad and we don't treat that. 18th century. It was more of a political change, and it wasn't Jesus that inspired that change, it was the classic Greeks, Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates, etc. Now, it's true, these gentlemen had an incredible impact on the development of our modern world, but their contribution was not morality at all. And I'm not going to go into this too much this morning, but they didn't believe in equality or you care about the marginalised. That did not come from these guys at all. They gave the world logic and reasoning and even politics and contributed in other ways, but not to considering other people as equals. And I'm not going to go through that now, but it's an interesting little rabbit hole to go down. Things like compassion and kindness, the value we place on that today, where did that come from? If you look at the word compassion in the New Testament, it's a really interesting word when it's applied to Jesus. It's a word that only occurs in the Synoptic Gospels, and it's a word that means to suck up or soak up like a sponge. And in our modern world, we'll probably use that word empathy to try and capture that idea. Jesus' compassion was putting himself, if you like, and feeling the pain and the trial and the difficulties that others were going through. It's quite a sophisticated concept that Jesus brings into the world. And there's other little sayings from Jesus where he says, when you go to a feast, don't sit in the main seat, sit in the lower seats. And when you've got a party, you put a party on at home, invite people that can't invite you back. Invite the poor, invite the crippled, the lame, the blind, those marginalised people that are oppressed and suffering. Invite those to give you a party. Don't invite people that are going to get some kudos or respect from. Here's another historian says, the idea of kindness and to elevate qualities like kindness would have sounded ridiculous and strange to those living in ancient Rome. And so there's been this huge shift, if you like, from how the world of Jesus operated. The brutal use of power, particularly the Romans, basically in their virtual genocide across Europe and against anyone who resisted them. The idea of slavery, violence, slavery, where slaves were literally the family they worked for. Institutionalised cruelty, like gladiator sports, capital punishment in public. Today, these things would shock us, wouldn't they, in our Western world? What was the catalyst for the change? Where did it come from? And I said, it's not, of course, the process happened during the Enlightenment and the Renaissance, but the influence and the moral power behind that change, where did that come from? Here's some examples. You know, the very first hospitals in history, very first hospitals, the big army had sort of little places where they catch soldiers up in a fight. They weren't hospitals, and they weren't available to the public. But the first hospitals that were available to people like you and I that could take our kids there were established by the followers of Jesus. Look at the influence that Jesus had on the world. Hospitals that we take for granted. Followers of Jesus implemented the first hospitals and the first health system. Even during plagues, and this is, people say, how did Christianity become so prevalent through the Roman Empire? When you imagine, you know, at the trial of Jesus, you've got Pontius Pilate stressing out about what Caesar is going to think. Could he ever imagine in his wildest dreams that within 3 centuries, Caesar would be a follower of this man that he's about to crucify? I mean, that's mind-blowing. This man would be a follower. I don't know if he's not a true follower, but he would be a follower, at least in principle, of this person that's about to be crucified. How did this happen? One of the reasons is the way the Christians responded in times of trial and crisis in the empire. So during outbreaks of plagues, now these were serious plagues that weren't like COVID where we all got to stay home and eat noodles and stuff. It was these sometimes decimated cities, and one of the plagues there that literally wiped out 25% of the entire Roman Empire. During these times of plague, people would put their infected relatives out on the street. You can understand why. They didn't want the rest of the family to die. It was the followers of Jesus who would go around and round them up, take them to hospices. These are the early developing hospitals, and look after them and sometimes patch them back to health, but often they would die from helping other people. This is quite profound. Horrific torture device is now bottom line place of refuge, place of help. In the work here on the earth, you can follow the green cross to get some sort of hope or safety. The dynamic change in the way we see a culture instrument and now connected to something of hope is quite profound. Just think about this to finish up. Everywhere around the world, right now as we're sitting here, all over the world on phones, on computer screens, on car dashboards, on legal documents, on business documents, all around the world, there is this date. There's this date that's got 2025. Where did that 2025 come from? Has Jesus had an influence on the world? Well, everywhere you look on your watch, on your phone, on your computer is testimony to the incredible influence and the incredible and the character of God in his life. Executed, of course, he was resurrected and he ascended into heaven, sits on the right hand of God, being turned back to earth. This afternoon, this evening, tonight, whatever, we remember that person as he says, do this, the things we're about to do now are done in remembrance of a person, of a man, in Christ Jesus. So let's, during this weekend particularly, let's preach him, follow the words of the Apostle Paul, preach Jesus Christ. Thanks, John.